President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s latest visit to the United States was, to put it mildly, less than spectacular. After all, he only managed to get 1% slashed from the 20% tariff rates that President Trump was hoping to impose on Philippine exports. Yes, we can cut it in different ways. It was a 1 percentage point, therefore 5% reduction on the 20% tariff rates proposed by the United States. But nevertheless, the whole episode showed that the Philippines' supposed special friendship with the United States would not translate into significant concessions, especially in the economic front. Now, this is important because, after all, the United States has been lagging in terms of investments in the Philippines, and bilateral economic relations have been nowhere close to their maximum potential. In fact, the two countries are yet to even finalize a free trade agreement between themselves, even as Vietnam and other former American rivals and enemies in the past are treating the United States as a major export destination. Having said that, the United States still remains a major security partner for the Philippines, its sole treaty ally, and is expected to give billions of dollars in defense aid to its Southeast Asian ally over the coming years. After all, the two countries have shared interests vis-a-vis China's rising aggressiveness in its adjacent waters, and the prospect of war in Taiwan is bringing the two allies closer together than ever since the end of Cold War. Nevertheless, the second Trump administration has shown that America is for America. America first could mean also growing isolationism in American foreign policy, or at the very least, a more transactional approach to its alliances around the world. In light of that, isn't it time for the Philippines to more aggressively diversify its foreign relations and more proactively establish a more multi-aligned foreign policy that allows it to not only have relatively stable relations with all major powers, but also have robust security partnership with other like-minded middle powers, especially other frontline states from Poland all the way to Japan, to discuss the prospects of a more self-reliant defense posture in the Philippines. We have a very special guest. Thank you very much, Dr. Cabalza. Marami tayong pag-usapan. Obviously, for some folks who are familiar with it, we were actually together recently for a special visit, parang study tour, experts visit to Eastern Europe, particularly in the case of Poland. So I want to talk about alliance among frontline states because we're both U.S. treaty allies. We are both facing threats from revisionist powers. Well, in the case of Poland, they're part of NATO. In our case, we have a bilateral mutual defense treaty. But before going there, what I want to discuss with you is what should be the way forward for the Philippines? Because just recently, President Marcos Jr. was at the White House in the Oval Office. It was a comprehensive discussion. A free trade agreement was passed. Not many people were very excited about the results of the agreement because there was 1 percentage point or 5% discount on the 20% tariff. I mean, I don't. No matter how you want to spin it, many people felt, the concession was not enough on the part of the United States. And there was kind of a lack of let's just say, reciprocity in that relationship. Like, they slap tariffs on us, but we don't slap tariffs on theirs. Our market is open. Theirs is not as open to us. We don't have a free trade agreement with them. But more importantly, there are also questions about even the more positive aspects of our bilateral relationship. For instance, President Marcos was asked about balancing between US and China. And of course, China's also response to the Philippines hosting more advanced American weapon systems. And President Marcos' position was very clear. This is not about balancing or playing games. This is about the Philippine national interest. But importantly, he also talked about the need for the Philippines to proactively pursue a coalition of different partners. So while he was trying to, let's just say, nice and decorous to his host and saying how important US is, quite subtly the president also indicated that the Philippines has to go beyond just this dependence on the United States and has to go for a much more diversified and multi-aligned approach, or at least maybe that's my read of what the president was trying to transmit during that meeting. So in light of that, I want to talk to you about what is this whole self-reliance defense posture doctrine about? What is the inspiration for that? Is it even possible for a country like the Philippines, which has been a treaty ally of the US for such a long time, for a country like us, which has been on the front line in terms of our own direct disputes with China, with the contrary, in terms of our limitations and size, is it even possible for us to be self-reliant in this era?
Yes, of course. If you try to look at the strategic importance of our geopolitical setting right now in the Philippines, self-reliance is not new to the Philippines. It has been introduced to us since 1974. Remember, during the first Marcosian era, there was this proposal to come up with the self-reliant defense posture, because at the time there was a threat, an imminent threat, because the U.S. at that time did not support Marcos Sr. In his advocacy in Mindanao, because there was some security issue in Mindanao during that period. So the intervention that was given to us is to come up with a creation of a national defense industry. And at the time, you see a lot of inventions coming from scientists, Filipino scientists. They came up with the bongbong missiles, and then of course you have indigenous vessels from the Navy. So there was a grand idea of inventions coming from Filipino scientists and engineers. And we came up with that idea of putting up a defense industry. And also you have the arsenal and ammunitions. So there was a grand strategy basically for the Philippines to come up with that law. And surprisingly, even major powers like, I would say, strong powers like South Korea, they got inspired with the SRDP of the Philippines. That's the reason why, if you try to look at it, the only significance of South Korea was that they have a political will, and of course, strategic interest to come up with their national defense industry. Yes, yes. Korea. And I think it was a state, they had a modest state funding. Because when you talk about SRDP, it's a state-centered endeavor. It's an initiative coming from the government, and you have to fund it. But right now, even before in the original SRDP, there was already the support coming from the private sector. But during the first Marcosian era, when we talk about SRDP, there was influx of foreign investments. However, in the second Marcosian era, when the revitalized self-reliant defense posture was introduced again, the caveat there is let's not have so much influx of foreign investments. Let's try to promote it to local investors, incentivize them, and encourage local investors. So that's the difference of the first Marcosian era's SRDP to the second Marcosian era's SRDP. So meaning to say that still the bulk there is to strengthen research and development. Because when you do SRDP, you have to have strong R&D. Let's try to, there were several countries that were able to succeed. Like, say, for example, we were in Poland together. What did they do? They had a territorial defense forces strategy because of their insecurity with Russia. And of course, we know the parallelism that Poland is almost similar to the case of the Philippines because of Ukraine, and of course with our Taiwan issue here. And we laid down a good premise for the Philippines already. One is, of course, you have the military modernization. Secondly, you have the territorial defense that covers the comprehensive archaeological defense concept. And now you have the revitalized SRDP. So you have a complete package already on how to come up with the defense economics to achieve self-reliance. Because basically, the world is changing right now. If you try to look at the geopolitics right now, some were saying, do we really have to rely with the US or with China, given, of course, that the Philippines is a small middle power? How can we come up with this kind of transitions, given that, of course, who do we rely with? Especially, of course, what happened recently in Washington with the tariff negotiation. And then, of course, we are being challenged by China in our own backyard in the West Philippine Sea. So how do we survive now? The answer is self-reliance. Self-reliance in terms of our defense posture, of our economic resiliency, and of course, on how we believe on ourselves. Because it's all about people-oriented when you talk about self-reliance. Because if you don't have those values to rely on your own capability, then how do you morph? How do you transform? So I think that's
so let me go back to the Marcos Sr. administration, because the 1970s, for a moment, let's just freeze the domestic politics, the dark martial law period, among others. But this was a kind of a period of foreign policy renaissance. The Philippines was among the first U.S. allies to directly normalize ties with Maoist China, to diversify its foreign relations. More importantly, I would say in the context of West Philippine Sea, we established the first modern airstrip in the
Yeah,
area in
great.
Pag-asa, Tito Island. There was a very strong understanding that you need a long-term strategy to secure Philippines' interests and sovereign rights in the area. In fact, things were so proactive on the part of the Philippines that we can see it from declassified information and cables that no less than Henry Kissinger, back then the National Security Advisor and Secretary of State of President Nixon, was so worried that the Filipinos are going to become the little bully because they're so active.
Yeah.
They're building facilities on the ground, and he was fearing that they'll be dragged into a conflict with other countries, including China, that they were trying to win over. So that was an era of extreme foreign policy proactiveness, which makes perfect sense also for the Philippines back then to develop its own defense industry. I want to understand also, first of all, can you give us a little bit more background, because you wrote a whole book about this issue. Ano yung kasaysayan nung ginawa ng Marcos administration? Ano yung mga points of success? Pero saan siya nagkulang at bakit hindi ito na-carry over time? But I also want to add something to this. If we were talking about the Nixon administration era, this was an interesting era because this was an era whereby the U.S. was engaging in strategic retrenchment. And the idea there is we cannot take care of everything. You know, they were facing economic crisis and challenges after the Vietnam War. So you saw, for instance, in the Middle East, the Shah of Iran was basically designated as a gendarmerie of the Middle East. And my sense is they were hoping to have something similar here, like Philippines will be America's sheriff in town, right? And Japan will be sheriff in North Asia, and Australia the deputy sheriff or sheriff in the Pacific region. I mean, so in a way, I absolutely agree with you that the Mindanao issue, there were some disagreements about perhaps how to move forward, but I can also see why the U.S. would have supported the Philippines becoming more self-reliant and proactive because of that grand Nixonian strategy of having regional powers coordinating things with the U.S. in terms of preserving international order during the Cold War period. But having said that, again, balikan natin, ano exactly what executive orders are we talking about? What level of institutional investments? How much money was going into things? What went right and what went wrong?
Okay. Let's go back. That was in 1974 when the first SRDP was introduced, and we know the political situation where there was martial law, and of course, we were focused so much with our outward-looking foreign policy that we have forgotten what is happening really in the Philippines. You have, of course, insurgency problems scattered all over the Philippines, and because of that, the economy was weak. And of course, there were insurgency problems, and I think that hindered also the promotion, robustness of the defense industry. And you also have the nuclear power plant, the first and traditional energy security that we have seen in Southeast Asia that has never been used. So you have those grand projects, megalomaniac projects from the first Marcosian era. And then, of course, what happened after 1986 and then succeeding administrations. So there was, I think the problem there was overconfidence in terms of how we ventured into our political system. And after that, our economy didn't pick up. It was like a roller coaster. Sometimes you go up, down. We have not arrived as a nation state. So I think that was the big problem during the contemporary period of our history, from first Marcosian era to the second Marcosian era. But of course, this time around, of course, a lot of things have been laid, especially on our national security. A good thing would be the legal framework on the legal warfare of the 2016 Hague ruling that at least voice out our advocacy when it comes to rules-based norms. And I think the current administration focused on that, and they were able to lay down a grand strategy on how to come up with those executive orders. And of course, the Republic Act on the revitalization of the national defense industry, and of course the self-reliant defense posture.
What I want to understand is bakit walang follow-through? What happened na after yung Marcos administration mukhang hindi natuloy ito? I mean, if we started with bongbong missiles in 1970s, you would have imagined probably we would have had developed our own supersonic Brahmos style, if not hypersonic missile by this time, right? So, ano nangyari? Bakit nawala?
I think it was a political dilemma from our end because, of course, during the first Aquino administration, Cory Aquino administration, all of the Marcos's projects were halted. They stopped it. They did not want to continue it. Even they closed the nuclear Batan the
Power
Batan
plant.
nuclear power plant, and then of course all the big projects.
Although for good reason.
For
I mean,
good
there
reason,
were
yeah, 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 I
serious
would-
safety
yeah,
issues.
Of course,
you know.
definitely, and all of those defense industries that were introduced during the first Marcosian era were stopped. So meaning to say that the continuity became the big problem also. Why we did not foster a robust national defense industry. So I think it's very political in such a way that if you try to look at some other countries, the reason why they succeeded because there was continuity and there was state funding. At the
Right.
time, the government did not fund, succeeding governments or administrations did not fund all of the previous projects of Marcos Sr. So I think that was the big, huge gap that when the son came to power, he realized that there is a need now for national defense industry and to revitalize the self-reliant defense posture because of what is happening in our external defense, in our external security. So I think this is now a good shot for him to at least convey Filipinos that we really have to secure our own indigenous capabilities, because otherwise, where do we get our defense material? From the US, from Israel, from Poland, Italy, and other countries. So now I think the best option is to do co-productions. I think we've seen that in Poland, how they were able to
Black Hawk.
the Black Hawk, and the Philippines by next year will possess the largest fleet of Black Hawks helicopters.
In Southeast Asia.
Not only in Southeast Asia, in the world. We're having that largest fleet of Black Hawks in the world. So meaning to say that we have now the money, we have the capability, but the problem is we don't have national defense industries. So that's the reason why in my book, I have identified several locations. Like say, for example, when you talk about naval, there are 16 maritime industries in Cebu itself. It's very, very vibrant when it comes to maritime industry. So imagine that only Cebu, with 16 maritime industries, they can build yachts, commercial ships, and even
We're top 5 in the world in terms of shipbuilding capacity.
yeah, definitely, we're a powerhouse when it comes to maritime industry. That's the reason why Cebu is a very good location there, and Cebu also has ammunition industry, like of course in I forgot the name of the town. And in the now, they were able
Where
to.
President Duterte comes from originally, right?
They were
Interesting.
able to invent the 45. That is, of course, world renowned. So imagine that you have already the scale of talent, the pool of talent when it comes to defense industries, because and aside from that, of course, for aviation you have Clark. And then later on, you have Bulacan, which will be the second largest airport in the world. And then, of course, here in Metro Manila, ammunitions and small arms, we have one in Marikina. And then when we talk about aviation industry, of course, you have Clark. And of course, in Visayas and Mindanao. So all over the country, you have potential sites for SRDP. What I'm trying to drive at here is to regionalize it. To regionalize these defense industries and come up with the NTF SRDP, equivalent to NTF WPS.
National Task Force, interagency approach.
Definitely, because if you want to pursue a grand, robust defense industry, then you have to penetrate the local and then internationalize it. Because basically, the goal is to export later on. Now, we are still in the phase of coming up with these industrial bases. Then the next phase would be for local consumption, and the third stage, which is the highlight of the SRDP, is to export our own products. So it's a long-term process. Maybe by 2040, we can do this already.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go back to this. Actually, in the previous episode on this show, we discussed industrial policy, which is a very important topic with Professor Lisandro Claudio of University of California, Berkeley. We were talking about bakit ang Pilipinas napakahina ang manufacturing kumpara sa ating mga kapitbahay, bakit hindi tayo nag-develop ng global industries katulad ng Hyundai, even VinFast, I would say increasingly. So pinag-usapan namin itong, we have this kind of a very kind of a libertarian, oligarchic political economy whereby the state has minimal intervention, in the affairs of the economy and organizing the commanding heights of the economy. And at the same time, you have oligarchs who are just happy with exploiting low-end to medium-end kind of products and don't want to go into the risky things. So industrial policy is basically about organizing society and even the big business sectors in ways that has a targeted industrialization, technology-driven kind of vision, right? And we saw that in South Korea when their dictator Park Chung-hee, for instance, basically bullied their oligarchs to go from low-end manufacturing to increasingly sophisticated manufacturing, etc. And the rest is history. Now, for me, I see parallels with the defense industry because in the defense industry, the more you need the government to be at the center of issues in terms of funding, direction, research and development, basically the rules and regulation. Now, going back again to the Marcos Sr. administration, are you suggesting here that there was a bit of a parang throwing out the baby with the bathwater situation, whereby we know there was a lot of bathwater, huge defects with the Bataan nuclear plant project, huge corruption problems, huge human rights violations, and anomalies and imeldific projects. Nevertheless, there were also good things during the Marcos Sr. administration, the foreign defense policy front. Just again, for people to realize this, because Dr. Cabalza, what I noticed with us Filipinos is we tend to be self-deprecating too much because we just don't know how successful we have been in history. We forget how great we used to be.
Agree.
So we have a heritage of greatness that we tend to forget. Therefore, we tend to underestimate ourselves. And that tends to blind us to possibilities moving forward or even appreciating new possibilities. So again, for the sake of our audience, how huge was the success of the Marcos Sr. administration in terms of building our own defense industry, and how huge of a loss it was that hindi siya na-sustain? Because I can easily think about the fact that, my goodness, for a long time, we didn't have a single supersonic fighter jet. We didn't get any of the F-16 and F-18 fighters. We're still trying to get an F-16 fighter in an era of 5th generation and soon 6th generation fighters. We're so behind the curve. So what happened? How did the Philippines go from having one of the most advanced militaries in the region, its own defense industry, how successful that was? And how did we end up with this situation whereby the son, 40 years later, has to basically start digging again and starting it from scratch?
I think we became a victim of our own success. Basically because, of course, during that period, imagine, of course, we were, in a way, we were able to come up with our defense industry. I think the good artifacts would be the Bataan nuclear power plant. We were #1 in terms of air power in the region during that time. You could see that in many of the museums, air museums around the country. So we had that ready, that kind of defense posture. However, sad to say, because of martial law, the image of the military was tainted. And in a way, it did not sustain their credibility until lately, where they were able to recover it. They're one of the most trusted organizations or institutions right now. So I think that was part of the dilemma, or strategic dilemma that we had when we had too much success. We tend to forget that sometimes we exaggerate it and sometimes we misuse it also in some other way. And because of that, you see in the history, contemporary history of the Philippines, the symbol of the military has its ups and downs also. Sometimes they were up, and then they were feared by the people, and then now they are the most credible organizations or institutions. So we're recovering right now, but in our recovery, we came too late now because our neighbors were able to focus. I think their niche was able to learn from the Philippines, and then they focused their own niche. Because when you talk about defense industry, you have to have a niche industry. Like say, for example, I've been arguing in my book that amongst the 5 domains, military domains, the land, air, maritime, cyber, and space, the least and the low cost investment would be cyber defense. One, we had a full talent of cyber defense specialists in the Philippines. Secondly, it's the least cost. You just focus on artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, or you at least have a cyber command.
In electronics warfare.
Electronics warfare, right, which we are experiencing in the Philippines. We have submersible drones coming from other countries, and then, of course, cybersecurity attacks and other deepfakes and so on. So if you only have to focus on cyber defense and become successful, with it. Like say, for example, Tallinn in Estonia.
Yeah, I was there.
You must.
I
I've
visited
been
the
there also.
cybersecurity
Yeah,
center.
imagine
Yeah.
that. It's only a tiny country, but it's the cyber hub of NATO. If the Philippines could become the cyber hub of ASEAN, so imagine what we can contribute to world security, to cyber security. So that's what I'm trying to drive at here. We cannot compete with with other domains, military domains in maritime, air, space, and what's the other one? In land, terrestrial. But at least in cyber we can do. That's the reason why.
Or more like we can be very dominant in cyber
Yeah.
and then have minimum
Definitely
development
definitely.
capacity, let's say drone production for
course, of
air,
course.
asymmetric capabilities, armored vehicles maybe in terms of land. And I think warships shouldn't be too difficult for us if we invest more in terms of frigate and or at least corvettes. No, so what you're saying is that we can be like kind of like a Da Vinci method, right? Be 100 top of the line in at least one domain, and then basic competencies in other domains. What about the aspect of maintenance?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because this keeps on popping up every time we say, bakit ang binibigay sa atin ng mga Amerikano ay Vietnam era? Bakit wala tayong nakukuha mga advanced weapon systems or mga fighter jets? At parating narinig natin sa ating mga
Because-
partners is, hindi nyo ma-maintain yan eh.
Yeah,
Tapos, nadagdag pa yung problema na, nako, baka mamaya may pro-China kayong president, bibigyan nyo pa sa China. Actually, I heard that during Duterte time that some were saying, now we're even more worried giving to you stuff because how assured we are that your president is not going to pass this down to the Chinese. Because the US has had experience of technology leak.
Yeah, definitely.
With partners in the Middle East, right, and South Asia, who had American weapon systems. Next thing you know, China is replicating a copy of that. So something is going on there.
Well, because we are recipients of many of these military material. We're not developing our own indigenous capability. Like say, for example, many of the F-16s and other aircrafts, warfighting jets, dual role vessels that we have right now, we bought it. We procured it from other countries, from Japan, Australia, France, not
Korea.
France, Korea, definitely.
FA-50s,
So yeah. So meaning to say that we are not doing reverse engineering. At the same time, we are weak when it comes to maintenance because we only recently passed the procurement law, a new procurement law that would say that, of course, we don't procure now the lowest bidding, but at least as quality, but we buy something that are quality products now.
Right.
So I think those are some of the changes that we have seen lately. And the most important thing is, of course, how do we deliver the political will? Because, of course, when you talk about just like the formula of South Korea, when they introduced their SRDP, there are three indicators there: political will, of course, the modest state funding, and at the same time their own robustness, their own capability of harnessing their own science
They have
and
a
technology.
strong industrial base.
Yeah, definitely. That's the reason why, like say for example, a good in UP itself, we're lacking now of nuclear scientists because many of our nuclear scientists have retired because
There's nothing to
nothing
work on,
to work.
yeah.
So imagine, so it's only lately they're trying to convey to come up again with another nuclear science program. So what I'm trying to drive at here is that, of course, it depends also on the supply and demand. Lately, of course, if you go to ADAS to many of the defense markets, it's only now that the Philippines is flexing its power of procuring all these sophisticated armaments because we have now the capability, and at the same time, because of our insecurity in the West Philippine Sea and also in our external defense, that's the reason why we are procuring. But the problem here is that we keep on buying, but the return of this investment is very short because we don't have industrial base.
Yeah.
So you get that point. So until now, that's the reason why I think only last year when they proposed for the revitalization of the SRDP and for the creation of the national defense industry, I think that's the best strategy for us now to make good of it. Because if we don't succeed the second time around, we become the laughing stock in the region. I mean,
Or maybe we won't have much of a country to. I mean, as they say, go big or lose home. I mean, our territorial integrity, maritime security, everything is in peril as we speak. Okay, I want to go back to this. I mean, malalim yung problema natin. In fact, alam natin nung isang taon pang sinasabi ng, I think we had foreign Defense Secretary Lorenzano on our different platforms in the past, and we didn't even have a parking lot for our warships for a while. So now basically we had to squeeze in ourselves dun sa former hygiene yard, and I visited that site. It's a peculiar situation that we don't even have sufficient facilities to host some of our newly acquired Korean-made pretty advanced warships that I visited recently, frigates and corvette. But so what I'm trying to understand here is this: we lost 40 years. In that period, we lost the chance also to acquire a lot of advanced platforms. In this period, China has gone up by leaps and bounds. They're a global superpower, technology-wise, quantitative-wise, everything. And then in the meantime, you have even some of our immediate neighbors, having submarines and modern fighter jets in ways that we don't. So what I'm trying to say here is this: isn't it too late already?
No, not yet. Because of course, when you talk about SRDP, it also translates to multi-layered security or defense partnerships. Meaning to say that, of course, the reason why we are...
So you acquire, you develop, and then you dialectically develop.
You partner also with other like-minded nations. Joint
production,
joint production, joint sale, and so on. So, meaning to say that, of course, we are now in the midst where, of course, even major powers, superpowers are transitioning. They are trying to do multi-defense alignment also, because, of course, the world is not conducive for partnerships or for alliances in terms of what do we really want. It's no longer the world order where it's stable. It's now unpredictable and ambiguous, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
It's changing. Basically, we do not know that maybe in the future we have another form of alliance, no longer with the United States and so on. So what we're trying to drive at here is that, of course, we are now in this stage where we are diversifying our defense procurement and our co-production facilities. Like, say, for example, of course, you have now the ammunition facilities that will be built and financed by the U.S. in Subic. And then, of course, there are some other proposals that maybe other nations like France and Japan, they will have co-production of our vessels, Coast Guard vessels. Meaning to say that, of course, some vessels will be done in Paris, others will be done in Manila or in Subic and so on. And so with that's the kind of proposal that we are also sending to Japan, because we have to understand also the current political and economic situation of our partners, because of course they have aging population there, and of course they need cash and money in their country also. So
they're more open to technology transfer and joint production.
Right. So you see those kinds of transitions that we are seeing right now. That's the reason why I wonder with the word of Trump, with the open economy or open, what was his word when he had this tariff negotiation with Marcos, that the open market with the Philippines.
Yeah, so basically we won't put any tariffs on them, but they'll put whatever tariff they want on us, 19%. Even though over time, actually, our terms of trade are very equitable and very even favorable to the United States. But for me, the bigger issue was, when President Marcos was talking about, we're not picking sides, we're here for national interests, Trump just, in his patronizing, dismissive way said, yeah, go ahead, talk to China. I'm fine with that. We talk to China too, we have excellent relations. It didn't come off like a very reassuring statement to some that, U.S. is with the Philippines 100%. That the U.S. will be there for us should things go crazy. Now, obviously, the U.S. will be there because it's not what Trump says. It's what the defense establishment does.
Agree,
it's what Hexet was saying in the Pentagon. It's all of this machinery of alliance, right, that puts it together. But what I'm saying is that at least there's this consciousness, both on the part of the U.S. and the Philippines, is that we cannot just rely on each other forever. Right? And we have our own independent national interests that do not necessarily converge all the time. And as Niccolo Machiavelli warned, half a millennia ago, for smaller states, the worst case scenario is to end up on the menu of the bigger powers. So you have to be very careful when you play your cards, right? Now, having said that, so how can we make the most out of our alliance with the United States, our only treaty alliance, the only superpower in the world, right? because my contention is we may be moving towards a post-American world, but it's not like China and Russia are necessarily the replacement.
No, no.
Russia is a very weakened power, as we can see.
Agree.
China was basically irrelevant in the latest conflict we have seen. I mean, yes, behind the scenes they support Russia a little bit here and there. Yes, they have a economic relationship with Iran, but where was China when the Gaza conflict happened? Aside from talking big, did they help Iran when they had the 12-day war? I'm not very sure about that. So my point is, but U.S. helped Ukraine hundreds of billions of dollars. Yes, they complain and all, but they did. They helped Israel during the war and attacks on Iran.
Yeah.
All the time. There
And also Pakistan.
Exactly. So they're So for everything we can say about U.S., they're actually helpful to their allies in ways I'm not sure China or Russia or any other superpower, or still supposedly superpower, has been. So we're still in the world of America as the preeminent military power. So how do you make the most still out of that against the backdrop of Trump and new isolationism?
The language now is about the present and the future, which is the Indo-Pacific. And the Philippines is situationally located in the middle of that. And given that, of course, the U.S. will still be the leading power in terms of defense, and definitely our alliance will be ironclad, and that's their commitment with us. And we will see long-term relations between the Philippines and the United States. I'm not saying that when we do self-reliance, we divorce from the United States.
It's not autarky.
It's not, I do. It's not autarky, but at the same time, we try to realize also our own importance, our own self-reliance, our own our own capability. Because ultimately, of course, even the strongest allies of the United States, that's their predicament. That let's not so much depend with the United States. Let's harness our own capability. Let's produce indigenous defense materials. Let's improve our own economy, and let's educate our people.
But you said we may not even need the alliance with the United States, and I'm not very sure about that, in the sense that, of course, I want us to be more independent from the U.S., but it will take time before we develop our defense industry.
It's a long-term process. Yeah, maybe in
10, 20 years.
Near and medium term, we cannot do it yet. Maybe 30 or 40 years, because remember, in 2075, of course, I do not know if we're still alive by the time we will become the 14th biggest economy in the world. So many say the projection is very bright for the Philippines. What I'm trying to drive at here is that while we need the alliance, let's maximize it, optimize it, but at the same time, let's nurture also our own capabilities, so that by the time that we're ready to get out from that alliance, we are capable of serving our own interests.
Now, speaking of self-reliance, part of that is also what President Marcos mentioned in the Oval Office, which is building a coalition of like-minded countries with the goal of preserving a rules-based international order. So in Poland, for instance, based on our conversation with friends and experts and policymakers in Warsaw, their idea of rules-based order is you don't just go there and attack another independent country.
Yeah.
And they're absolutely worried about the resurgence of Russian imperialism with 21st century characteristics. They also keep on mentioning we're separated only by one or two countries, which is giant Russia and giant China, right? We're just at the opposite ends of that Eurasian landmass, right? At the rimlands of that. So where do you see, in terms of Philippines working with other middle powers or mid-sized countries? Where does middle power diplomacy and cooperation come in?
Okay, that's a beautiful paradigm in terms of how do we nurture a middle...
very Trumpian, no? Very beautiful. Very beautiful.
middle power cooperation. Of course, that's what we've been trying to tell to our Polish friends there. That of course, when we talk about middle power alliance or cooperation, of course, although they were trying to negate at first that they were saying that middle power rules-based norms is only for middle powers. But if we try to cooperate, if we try to leverage on that kind of cooperation, then at least we could tell giant neighbors that, hey, we're together, the middle powers are together, we are united, and we want some change, because ultimately we should become a catalyst of change. What's the purpose of being a middle power if you don't change the world order, right? So that's the reason why how to harness it with Warsaw, Manila. I think one is, of course, let's go back to SRDP. We have the same path in terms of our military strategy. They did also territorial defense strategy, same as what we have done recently with our territorial defense operations. Now, they were very successful when it comes to their SRDP. They've been selling their Black Hawks to us with their co-production with Lockheed Martin with the U.S. It's the same thing that we should follow from their example. Try to learn from their best practices. And I think another thing about that in terms of the coalition that you're talking about when it comes to Middle Power Alliance would be the power of the mind.
Right.
Right? Because of course, Poland is blessed. It's the food basket of Europe. At the same time, it's their intelligentsia that is helping their economy pump up. So when you say if we have a think tank diplomacy or people-to-people engagements,
cybersecurity, drone production.
Yeah, definitely.
They're
then
quite
at least
strong on those fronts.
We could learn from them. They could also learn from our strategy, and then I think that's the beauty of middle power cooperation.
Well, speaking of Poland, they're the most dynamic economy in Europe, growing by the average of 5% over the past decade or two. Now they're a G20 country, but they're also putting a lot of money in their defense. And it looks like their defense build up and their economic dynamism actually go together. So in a way, sometimes this bread versus butter kind of, guns versus butter or guns versus bread kind of, this kind of bifurcation sometimes doesn't make sense because they can feed off on each other. We can see that in South Korea's case, whereby they have a massively developing economy throughout the decades, but also rapidly developing defense capability. They're top 10 exporters of defense equipment already. We see that in Turkey, we see that in India. Many countries are moving on those fronts. So should the Philippines spend more also on its own defense spending? Last time I checked, we're spending less than 1% of our gross domestic product on defense. And in terms of acquisition and all, we're way behind the curve, I would say, right?
Yeah,
compared to the size of our economy.
Yeah,
right?
definitely in ASEAN we're the lowest so far. But lately there is a slow increase with our defense spending because of course we were able to buy now what did we buy the one from India, the BrahMos missiles, and then some were saying that we need more of that, and then of course there's a possibility that we would also buy missiles from the US and other from other countries also. So meaning to say that the defense spending is of the Philippines is slowly increasing. But of course, it's not what we expected from our government. But once we have the defense industry, where at least we would see some local investors trying to put their own niche onto that dun sa mga gagawin natin mga produkto, no. I think that would help us increase the defense spending in the Philippines because ultimately the key word now is the PPP, public-private partnership. It's not only, of course, the government will spend at least modestly.
The seed money.
Yeah, there should be a seed money there. But ultimately, once you see now the cooperation of the private sector, we will see more investments and it will become big. And we'll see what happens in the future.
Last part, and this is important because, President Marcos Jr. is entering his legacy years as we speak. As we speak also, there could be another Duterte over the horizon come 2028. So one of the questions I get, around the world is, okay, how can we be confident about the direction of this country's foreign defense policy when you can have, once again, another wild swing in your foreign policy? So in short, is there a way, for the lack of a better term, to Duterte-proof our defense strategy? And what is your sense, because you advise the Philippine Armed Forces among others, what is your sense of them in terms of them making sure that yung interest ng ating bayan ng mauna dito regardless ng sino nakaupo dyan sa Malacanang come 2028 and beyond?
Oh, that's a very challenging question, but looking at our defense and security sector, I think they are well prepared in terms of the return of the pivot to China, if I may say. Of course, looking at some of the future scenarios, trying to have that sense of strategic foresights. But going beyond that, of course, they were able to lay down important or foundational strategies like the defense, Philippine territorial defense, and the self-reliant defense posture. Those are very important doctrines that, in a way, would help the armed forces to fortify their strength and to at least lay down their strategies in the future, because ultimately we do not know if another populist leader would come and try to revise some of these doctrines that we have right now. But once you have inculcated that to our military officers, at least they know what to do in the future.
So you see a way of institutionalizing this, which is ultimately goes back to your dissertation, right? Strategic culture.
Yeah, yeah.
Where is the Philippine strategic culture now, and where it should go?
That's the reason why I really wanted to come up with a new book on strategic culture, because ultimately.
So what is strategic culture for the purpose of our audience?
Yeah, well, of course, definitely when we talk about strategic culture, it's all about the cumulative values, behaviors, and political beliefs of the people
And
of
shared
the nation.
political memory, right? Also memory,
So
right?
definitely. That's the reason why that if you try to look at the contemporary period of the Philippines, we were able to come up with strategic influence to the world, like lawfare. That was a very
Right.
bright strategy
on-close case, yeah.
or strategic culture that we have provided for the world. That in case of insecurity, you can use international law for your own survival.
On that note, thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you very
Cabalza, for
much.
that very comprehensive discussion. I'm looking forward to catching up on this issue in the coming years, maybe, if there are more updates and hopefully assurance on that front. Catch us again next week here on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on Spotify and YouTube. I'm Richard Haydarian, and that was The View from Manila, where One News, all sides, all the time.